Hello Rejects and welcome. Today we are going to be breaking down the ranged damage dealer for your strike team, the Veteran Sharpshooter. As the name implies, the Sharpshooter excels at medium and long-range combat. They are particularly effective at eliminating specials, elite, and enemies equipped with small arms. However, they are still formidable in close combat. While they lack the crowd control of the Ogryn and the damage output of the Zealot, they can still hold their own. In terms of resiliency, they are middle of the pack, possessing 150 health and 200 toughness by default. This makes them tougher than the Psyker, but more fragile compared to the Ogryn. Before we get into feats, gear, and builds, it's important to first understand some of the roles the Sharpshooter fulfills in a team. One is to eliminate ranged enemies, or at the very least keep them suppressed. Large amount of scab and drag shooters can quickly shred your team's toughness, leaving them vulnerable to melee enemies. Second is the elimination of special and elite enemies, ideally before they can cause any harm. Snipers, gunners, and reapers are all prime concerns since they can often sit far away and still engage you. Third is to assist in crowd control during hordes and ambushes. Sure, you won't be able to compete with the Zealot or Ogryn, but Sharpshooters can certainly prevent backspawners from sneaking up on your team. Psykers in particular can be vulnerable due to their low HP and time it takes to cast Brain Burst, so sticking with them isn't a terrible idea. How you prioritize this can be dependent on your team's composition, but in a balanced team in quick play, I would suggest focusing on ranged enemies, elites, and specials as much as possible. The Veteran has a substantial array of weapons for both melee and ranged combat. To keep this training below the 3-hour mark, we are going to break the weapons down by type. For ranged weapons, the broad categories include the shotgun, bolter, plasma gun, lasguns, and autoguns. While shotguns are typically associated with extreme close-range combat in video games, the Lawbringer can still reach out and kill basic enemies at 25 to 30 meters. Its alt-fire mode loads a shell with a horizontal spread pattern with high knockback, making it good for knocking down special enemies or incoming hordes. Although it does fare better than expected at medium range, it is far less ammo efficient than the Lasgun and even Boltgun. While it is powerful, it usually will still take 2 shots to kill special and elite enemies on Malice difficulty and above. Still, on tighter maps, it fares fine and still allows you to accomplish your basic roles as the Sharpshooter. Just be mindful of the poor ammo economy. The bolter or bolt gun, as of making this video, is one of the more popular options for sharpshooters. Not only is it an icon of the Warhammer franchise, but is also very effective and fun to use. It has good one-shot kill potential, even on heresy against many of the elite enemies. Plus, it can quickly run through the more annoying enemies like bulwarks, crushers, reapers, and mutants. It does have low reserve ammunition, although this isn't a major issue if you don't use the bolt gun to try and clear hordes. When firing from an aimed stance, it will only fire a single round, making this ideal for engaging weaker foes or ones at long range. The hipfire by contrast fires at least 2 rounds, but fires continuously if the trigger is held. This makes hipfiring effective against tougher enemies like crushers and bulwarks, or when survival is more important than ammo conservation. The third weapon, the plasma gun, definitely has issues in its current iteration. While it is immensely powerful both with its basic and charge shot, the plasma gun overall is very cumbersome to use. Both shots have a noticeable firing delay, meaning you must track your target until you fire. While it isn't always an issue, it makes you miss far too many shots for it to be effective. This, tied with its overheating mechanic and less than stellar ammo count, means, to me at least, its high damage does not nearly justify all of its shortcomings. Still, connecting charge shots is very satisfying, and it definitely deals big damage to monstrosities and the assassination mission bosses. Our fourth weapon category does have a few caveats. Autoguns include 4 subcategories, including semi-automatic, burst, automatic, and braced. They do all have similar characteristics, including having more ammo than the previously mentioned weapons, but less than the Lasguns. They are also typically on the lower end of the damage scale, excluding the semi-automatic autoguns. These will typically deal a fair amount of damage and are usually capable of one-shot headshotting common enemies on Heresy and above. However, this comes at the cost of reduced ammo capacity and magazine size. Burst-fire autoguns deal a bit less damage than the semi-auto variants, have more ammo, but unfortunately fire exclusively in 3-round burst. In a game where conservation of ammo is critical, these weapons can be a liability. Burst fire also slows down the acquisition times after firing, meaning taking out multiple enemies quickly isn't always easy. The automatic autoguns, weird to say I know, deal even less damage but get more ammunition to compensate. They fire fully automatic both from the hip and while aiming. Overall, these autoguns are fairly forgiving at close and medium range, but can struggle to hit long range targets. Finally, braced autoguns function almost identically to the automatic ones, except you cannot aim down sights. Instead, you brace the weapon into your shoulder. While this does obviously reduce your accuracy and ability to acquire distant targets, they generally deal more damage or have more ammunition as compensation. The braced autoguns can be effective, just make sure you understand the range limitations of them. The last, and certainly not the least category of weapon, is the Lasgun. While often derided in the Warhammer universe, given the nickname Flashlight, against the enemies you will encounter, the humble Lasgun is more than a match. Like autoguns, there are a few categories, including the Recon, Contrail, and Hellbore Lasgun, with the Hellbore, as of making this video, being significantly underpowered. This is due to the charge-up shot mechanic of the weapon not really dealing that much more damage compared to the heavy Contrail variant that fires much faster and is more responsive. The biggest defining characteristic of the Recon Lasguns is that they fire full auto. This makes them the most forgiving to use. They also deal a good amount of damage and are very efficient with ammo. Recon variants are typically suited for close and medium range combat, as special and elite enemies require consecutive headshots in order to kill, a feat which is more challenging as range increases. The Contrail Lasgun is the closest thing to the standard Lasgun you will find. They typically deal high damage, capable of single-shotting basic enemies and double-tapping the weaker elites. They also include a holographic optic which dramatically improves accuracy and target acquisition time at range. To boot, they also feature, in my opinion, the most generous amount of ammunition. Do keep in mind that all Lasguns use more than one unit of ammo per shot, and the amount varies depending on what model is being used. There are differing variations of each category of Lasgun. Typically, the delineating statistic is damage, fire rate, and reserve ammunition. For example, compared to the MG12 and 1 Alpha, the MG4 Contrail Lasgun has more ammo, fires faster, but deals less damage per shot. While ranged weapons are usually the star of the show for the sharpshooter, melee weapons are just as important to your build. There are a host of weapons available, including axes, knives, swords, and more industrial options. To keep this training focused, we will be sticking with weapons that I believe complement the class best, including the Katachan, Power, and Chainsword. The Katachan sword is the simplest of the three, however still very effective. Generally, both its light and heavy attacks are good at dealing with large groups of enemies. However, like all melee weapons, each variant will have slightly different combos. The Katachan sword usually has a strike down attack as part of its heavy or light attack combo. Its ult ability allows the user to block an attack with a parry and a counter. This can be good when trying to remain defensive but still hit enemies without burning stamina doing a push attack. Next, the Power Sword seems to be the most popular thus far with sharpshooters. Both its heavy and light attacks can cleave through multiple enemies. The weapon becomes much more powerful when using its ult, allowing all attacks to be energized, hence the name Power Sword. This increases both damage and the ability to cleave through multiple foes. The only downside is the slight delay in charging up, leaving you vulnerable if the enemy is already on you. In that case, using a push attack to create space can buy you time to activate your weapon. The final melee weapon is another icon of the Imperium, being capable of dealing with single targets and hordes reasonably well. Its light attacks include 2 single target attacks, followed by a relentless and vanguard sweep, Its heavy attacks, by contrast, focus solely on horde clearing with 2 vanguard attacks. The activation ability allows you to rev up the motor, giving you dramatically increased damage to a single target over a small period of time. Once you strike a target, the sword will continue to saw through the enemy until they are slain, or the attack expires. One advantage of this is the attack will usually lock up the enemy, preventing them from counterattacking. The downside is that nearby enemies will be able to strike you while your blade is busy eviscerating its target. With weaponry covered, it's time to move on to the basic abilities that make the Sharpshooter unique. While you do unlock unique feats every 5 levels, we will discuss those in specific builds. The grenade slot for the Sharpshooter is the Fragmentation Grenade, which is fairly straightforward and good at dealing with large groups of weak enemies. It can also be upgraded later to deal bleed damage. Next, for every special or elite kill within your coherency, your entire strike team receives a small percentage of ammunition. While this won't completely rid the need of ammo bags, it can reduce the frequency they are needed. The final 2 base feats include 15% additional weak spot damage and 40% additional reserve ammunition for all ranged weapons. Both of these let the Sharpshooter do what he does best: shoot. Finally, your combat ability, Volley Fire, highlights non-Ogryn special and elite enemies and increases your range damage by 50% for 5 seconds. Again, a very straightforward ability, but can create strong synergy at level 30. As a quick example, using the Counterfire feat can allow you to remain in Volley Fire as long as you can keep killing ranged, elite, and special enemies. That paired with Unwavering Focus will make you incredibly resistant to ranged fire. Now that we've covered all the parts that make up the Sharpshooter, let's put it all together and start thinking about builds. We will be creating 3 separate builds revolving around the Bolter, Shotgun, and Lasgun. The Boltgun excels at quickly putting down tough enemies at the expense of slower weapon transition and reload times. To leverage our elite and special killing ability, we will be using the confirmed kill feat in Tier 1. Tactical Reload in Tier 2 will make the slow reloads more bearable and prevent you from being caught with an empty weapon. For Tier 3, any of the options work, with a preference towards Biooptic targeting and covering fire. In Tier 4, Unwavering Focus can allow you to endure more incoming fire, while Camo Expert can let you avoid damage altogether and lets you more safely fix objectives. For Tier 5, the One After Another feat helps mitigate the slower reload speeds even more. Deadshot, on the other hand, might be a better option if you feel confident your team can hold the enemy back. For our last feat, Counterfire works well if your team struggles at dealing with shooters, while the Bigger They Are feat improves your Ogryn and Monstrosity takedowns. Since the Bolter works well against heavy enemies, a good complementary melee weapon would be the Power Sword. This gives you exceptional horde clearing and means you are less likely to be overrun if you are forced to stand and fight. For our next build with the Shotgun, we will be carrying over the 2 reload speed skills from our Bolter build, as the Shotgun can suffer from some very lengthy reload times. At minimum, I'd recommend taking Tactical Reload to make partial reloads a little bit more bearable. In Tier 1, I would suggest taking either Confirmed Kill or Exhilarating Kill, since both of these proc way more often than at arm's length when using a shotgun. Covering fire in Tier 3 is also more viable, since the Shotgun will put you at close quarters with your teammates. In Tier 4, you have a little bit of flexibility, and Duck and Dive might be a decent option since you will be a bit more close combat oriented, but Unwavering Focus is still a solid option. Finally, our last feat is much more open to user preference, although I lean towards Sustained Fire as it can let you continually pump out damage and let you deal with special and elite enemy spam. Melee weapon options are a bit more open for this build, but if you want to stick with a rugged and aggressive build, the Chainsword combines good control and single target damage to stay flexible. For our final build, we will be going with a Lasgun sniper build, primarily focusing on using the MG12 or MG1 Alpha Lasgun, although the MG4 can be used as well. The at arm's length feat for Tier 1 can work pretty well considering the Lasguns are very accurate and easy to use at long range. Just remember to try and keep your distance when possible, otherwise the other 2 feats synergize well with the Lasguns. Thanks to the long range and fast reloads of the Lasgun, Sniper for Tier 2 is a pretty safe choice, giving you free additional damage that can make a huge difference against the tougher elites and monstrosities. Biooptic targeting is another good feat for the sniper role, highlighting targets for your team so they can either engage or disengage as needed. This is also very useful if you have a Psyker on your team, letting them assist in killing elites. For tier 4, Unwavering Focus and Camo Expert both synergize with this playstyle, as you likely won't be dodging and dashing too much when sniping. Deadshot for our tier 5 feat would be the best option in this role, allowing you to deliver more critical hits and be more accurate at long range. Just be mindful of your stamina bar. Finally, both Counterfire and the bigger they are fit into the sniper role nicely. It may come down to team loadout and team composition. For example, if your team cannot deal with ranged enemies, Counterfire would be my recommendation. Melee weapon is again dealer's choice, but the Katachan sword is more fitting thematically. A sniper is not likely going to be lugging around a bulky chainsword or power sword. Plus, the sword's parry ability can save you from a random poxwalker if it spawns behind you. With any class, there is some basic etiquette to be observed. Not only does this make you a more effective player, but it prevents your teammates from getting pissed off. Try to avoid using your ranged weapon only. In most levels, you should be using your melee weapon just about as much as you use your ranged weapon, although this can be heavily dependent on your team. As much fun as it is to unload into hordes, it's generally not the most effective way of handling them, and there may be more pressing range threats to deal with that the rest of your team cannot handle. Also, avoid killing Psyker Brainburst targets unless it's absolutely necessary. Getting off successful Brainbursts allows the Psyker to deal more damage, and they essentially have unlimited ammo unless they suffer from perils of the warp. On Malice and above, enemies become much more resistant to being smitten, so working with your Psyker is ideal, but weaker enemies like Trappers, Bombers, and Shooters can be Brainbursted with one cast. Try to limit how many Poxwalkers you shoot. I won't say don't ever shoot them. I get it, it's a lot of fun watching a Poxwalker explode from a bolt shot, but again, you have a melee weapon for that reason. Keep an eye out on your ammo consumption as well. Yes, you are the primary shooting class, but the Ogryn and Zealot both have good ranged options as well, and they will need the ammo. If you do find yourself running low on ammo frequently, consider using your melee weapon more often or limiting your ranged engagements to critical targets and shooters. Typically, this isn't an issue for me personally unless I'm playing too aggressive. Overall, the Sharpshooter is an extremely important class in Darktide and provides a lot of utility to the team. However, learning restraint and how to defend yourself in close combat are both critical skills of being a good Sharpshooter. If you keep a sharp eye and keep enemy shooters' heads down, you'll make yourself an invaluable member of your strike team. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know in the comments what class I should review next. Also, if you feel I missed anything or would like to expand on anything I talked about, I'd love to hear about it. But until next time, happy hunting, rejects.